Okay, and as you now know, the conference is going to be recorded so that we can post the archival conference up on our website and also at the Autism Reading Room website. While we're getting started, I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Emily Steinow, and I'm with PEATC. We are going to be hosting this lunch hour, an Understanding Autism webinar with our guest presenter, Dr. Basu, and her team over at the MindSpec group. We are just going to wait a few more minutes to see if we have any other late joiners, and then we'll get started. Okay, I'd like to start out by thanking everybody for taking some time out of their day to learn a little bit more about autism. We are going to get today's webinar started with just some housekeeping rules. First, if you have not already done so, please go ahead and call in using your phone to access the audio portion of the webinar. The phone number and the access code that you'll need to do that are right up on the slide that you should be able to see presently. If there is a mute button on your phone setup, please use it so that we can preserve the audio quality of the webinar for playbacks. We are going to be having participants unmuted so that our co-presenter can also present. So if everyone could please use that mute button, that'll prevent us from hearing if you have your kids with you or any coworkers that would be walking by. That would be much appreciated. Next, certainly we want this to be an interactive and informal webinar. The MindSpec team is certainly happy to answer any questions that you have. The way that we ask that you do that is use your chat bar to type in your questions, and you can do that at any time through the webinar. Okay?
So you can't hear us.
No. All right. Let's talk first just a little bit about PEATC. Hopefully most of our participants are familiar with PEATC. PEATC is the Parent Educational Advocacy and Training Center for the state of Virginia. We've been around for about 34 years. We are a federally funded and mandated parent training and information center for Virginians. And what does this mean for you as a parent or a teacher? It means that PEATC is here to assist you in building on your knowledge. A large part and parcel of what we do is disseminate information through trainings, one-on-one consultations, easy to read and understand handouts that we disseminate, and webinars just like this one.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to do
It was just something little.
Can somebody else do it? I just have all sorts of stuff going through my head
Okay.
that I have to do.
Again, if conference participants could mute their sound, because all the participants can hear what is going on in your area. So that chatter there, that would be excellent to help us in preserving the information. It is our hope that this webinar will enable parents and teachers to better understand the basis of the behaviors exhibited by children with autism, and also to learn about emerging trends in research and get acquainted with a growing resource presented by MindSpec, the Autism Reading Room. This resource catalogs and organizes information, and it is going to include a newly planned section designed to summarize best practices in terms of therapies and interventions. For those of us attending the webinar that are parents and teachers, we are all familiar with the fact that the IDEA law states that programs, curricula, and practices should be based on scientifically based research to the extent practical. And we are hoping that by introducing you to the Autism Reading Room, that this will provide both teachers and parents ready access to new and emerging trends.
Get information from PEATC? So I want to hear what they're learning today, because I'm sure all of our parents are listening to this right now. So I want to hear what they're listening to.
I'm going to go ahead and mute participants. And I'm doing this primarily because there is a lot of talking that is being recorded as part of the webinar. And again, we do want to preserve the audio quality so that folks who could not attend in real time can understand the information as presented. When our co-presenter begins to lead the presentation, again, I will need to unmute the audio so that they can present. So I'm hoping that folks can use their chat bar if they have any questions, or again, try to refrain from commenting during the webinar. That would be super. So with us today is Dr. Basu. She is the Chief Scientific Officer of MindSpec. Her research focus is to gain a fundamental understanding of the molecular events, so all the way down to the molecular level, that lead to neurodevelopmental disorders. Her group is rolling out the Autism Reading Room, which is a new online resource designed to enhance understanding of autism research, and there's the website for everyone. In addition, Dr. Basu is the parent of a special needs child and brings that experience to her work as well. So if everyone could please welcome Dr. Basu, I am going to go ahead and turn over the conference to Dr. Basu and MindSpec. And in doing that, I am going to go ahead and unmute participants so that our co-presenters can present. Again, if all participants could refrain from speaking or place their phone on mute, it will greatly help us preserve the audio quality.
The conference has been muted. The conference has been unmuted.
For the kind introduction, and with this we'll pick up our part of this presentation, Understanding Autism, and we would like to give you a tour of the Autism Reading Room, a new online resource which is designed to enhance public understanding of autism research. But basically what we are trying to do is to bring cutting-edge science to a broader audience. And it's a difficult task to explain all the nuances of science in plain English so that it's something which is understandable to anyone affected by autism, families, service providers, teachers, other caregivers, policymakers, and so on. So this is a project which is many years in the making. However, we are very pleased to announce that we just released this portal in April, honoring Autism Awareness Month. And so with this background, I'll get started with this resource. And today, our presentation, mostly me and the scientists at MindSpec, would give an overview of this new portal. But we will focus on 4 different areas. One is the autism profile, which is going beyond the triad of impairments in autism. And then we'll pick up basic brain biology, how a child with autism, how the brain differs from a neurotypical brain. And we call it neurotypical because there is a huge variability even in the so-called normal or typical population. And in this reading room, we focus on another area, trains analysis. So all the, as you all may be familiar with, that the autism research is really moving at a very rapid pace. So what it all means, looking at the hard numbers, so we provide many charts and maps and graphs to go over that. But again, we try to do it in such a way that it is accessible to a broader audience. And finally, we will give a tour of the live site. So before that, let me show you how does this portal look like. And we give the URL. So if any of the participants of this webinar is in front of a computer, you can go and type in that, readingroom.mindspec.org. It's a live site, and you should be able to go there. So I'll just highlight a couple of, and Catherine, can you please go back? Yes. I'll highlight a couple of features of this site. It starts with a main slider, and you see a number, and the number that I'm reading is 19657. So that's the number of publications as of today that has been reported in NIH's PubMed database. So that's a huge number. So we try to go and dissect that number into different areas of research. How many, what kind of development are there in the causes or risk factors, or in the treatment or diagnosis, and what are the advances. So this number is the sum total of all the areas of research that is reported in PubMed as of today. So behind this web page, we have a program that goes to the PubMed database, and each day it refreshes this number. And I'll highlight the other areas that we have in this portal, which is a clinic, and I'll talk more on that. And then there is basic brain biology and advances. Also, we just released a new autism quiz app. It is available for free from iTunes. And also, we give a video introduction of our site. And finally, no portal would be complete without a news box. And we do have that, but while giving out the news, we have developed a really novel strategy, which is news in context. So all the news items or the breaking news that parents and teachers and everybody we are hearing every day, what it means in context of the vast amount of autism research. So we connect the news items to different areas. And also, we have an autism dictionary. So while reading these news stories or any other section, if you just want to brush up a definition of any of the term, you can go to the autism dictionary. And again, the autism quiz, which is available both over the internet or via an app in your from the App Store, and statistics. Okay, with that, I will give you a quick overview of our clinic. So within this clinic, we have divided it into 4 sections. One is the autism profile, next risk factors, next diagnosis, and therapy. So therapy section is currently under construction, because that is, we are taking a slightly different approach and trying to put all, not only the available therapies, but what are in the works, which is by scientists we call it translational medicine, so, and preclinical models. So we are trying to do that, and we are hopeful that the therapy section will be released by early fall. And so one question I want to spend a few moments on is, what is autism? And as we all know, autism is diagnosed by behavioral observation according to the criteria put forth by DSM. And kids are observed in the 3 areas of impairments, which are social interaction, communication, both verbal, like language development, and nonverbal, such as joint attention, and the occurrence of repetitive behavior. So those are the three core areas which we all know and much talked about. But beyond that, there are a few things which I want to stress. First of all, again, onset in first years of life, and there are two forms that one is the regressive, where a child grows apparently normal for the first 1 or 2 years, and suddenly there is arrest of developed functions. And also, there is a lifelong persistence. And the clinical presentation of autism really changes as the child grows older. And so one of the theme in our Autism Reading Room is to focus on the children, adolescents, and adults. So I see there are a couple of questions coming up. So why don't I finish the next slide, and then I can take this question. Okay, so again, what I said, a triad of deficits is what we all talk about. But in the clinical presentation, there is a broad range of variability in symptoms and severity. And another area which was reported by parents for sometimes, like there are sleep disturbances, GI problems, and different types of sensory disturbances. And now there is a new research focus going on into those areas, and we already have few publications or research reports giving more of a large-scale studies showing how many percent of children diagnosed with autism develop those co-occurring symptoms and so on. And our projection is in the next years we will hear more about the co-occurring symptoms. So with this brief overview, I'll take a couple of questions.
So the first question I see from Laura is, at what age is it best to assess whether a child is autistic? What specialist determines this?
There is emerging, consensus that the first symptoms of autism emerge at the end of the first year. And there is quite a bit of research done at what age it is being diagnosed. And it used to be, even 10 years ago, the average age for diagnosis was 5.2 years. But with the recent awareness, it's basically, I think, between 3 and 4. But talking to clinicians, people who diagnose autism, I think at present, you can safely say that in most places, again, within quote, most places, like people where a pediatrician is aware of autism, it could be between 2 to 3 years. Okay, so with that, I will move on to my next slide. And in fact, my next slide starts with this answer which I have just given you. Symptoms of autism usually emerge late in the first or early in the second year of life after a period of relatively typical development. So the bullet points that you're seeing in this slide is from a very recent study. It's the largest brain growth study. It was done at UCSD, University of California, San Diego. And for this study, the population that was, the ASD population that was recruited ranged from 12 months to 50 years, and so it's a broad range, and they have looked at every time point between 1 year to 50-year-olds, and in fact they looked at 586 MRI scans, and this study came up with these observations. And I think the first observation has been reported by many different groups, is a child with autism, it shows early brain overgrowth. And that is usually around the first birthday, and it continues for the next couple of years. And then this early brain overgrowth is followed by a prematurely arrested brain development in childhood, and then followed by shrinking between adolescence and middle age. So the third observation is somewhat new and only reported by this group, and in order to have more weight to this observation, it needs to be repeated by other groups and with other population. So basically, I'll just give a little overview of how we interpret a scientific report, as there are observations which we track and then curate, but we also need to see whether the same observation is given by other groups. And I think it is kind of, a consensus again is coming up, is autism is a disorder of aberrant neural circuit development, and there is weak functional connectivity between the two hemispheres of the brain. So, what I'm presenting in this slide today are the very recent studies, and my projection is there will be more such studies will come out, and in the next couple of years, maybe in the next 5 years, we will have a much clearer picture of what goes on in the brain of someone affected with autism. Okay, so I'll take the next question, and after that, Catherine Swanwick of our group, a neuroscientist, will go into the basic biology. So if you could give me the question.
So the next question is there any research about the effect of the shrinking brain on behavior?
I think the short answer is no, and that's to the best of my knowledge. And as I said, this is a very new study, and there are very, very few studies done on the brain imaging of adults with autism, although there is another big study being done in the UK. However, there is no firm correlation that I know of. And I see there is another question. Is there a relationship between ADHD and autism? So recent research shows that a subpopulation of children with autism also show symptoms of ADHD. And from a genetics point of view, there is a big overlap between the genes and other types of genetic lesions identified in ADHD and autism. So, the answer would be yes, there is some correlation and overlap. Again, this is the genetics work is very much work in progress, and we do not know at this point in time any clear mechanistic relationship between these two disorders. Okay, so now Catherine Swanwick will pick up.
Hello, this is Catherine. I'm part of the MindSpec research team, and I have a Ph.D. in neuroscience. So I will go over the brain biology section of the reading room just briefly. You can access the brain biology section with the top sub-navigation tab as shown in this slide. and I'll just briefly summarize the main points from it. So first we go through the developing brain, and this cartoon shows prenatally the major stages of brain development. So early on, at 4 weeks gestation, you can see most of the brain is taken up with the optic vesicle, which later becomes the eye. But there's 3 major parts of the brain, the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain, which quickly change so that at 7 weeks, the forebrain grows very quickly and takes over the optic vesicle. And then by 3 months, the forebrain actually takes up most of the brain. So that's what you would see on the outer surface with the wrinkles. And the midbrain actually is deep inside your brain, and the hindbrain is folded up under the brain. And we'll go more through that in a minute. And another important part is that the cells of the brain, which are called neurons, they actually are born near the middle of the brain and they migrate outwards. And that's an important point for later too. So let's talk more about the cells of the brain called neurons. So they're very special in that they work based on electrical currents. So they're the only cells in the body that do that. And you can see from this picture here that the neurons, typical neurons, they form like a tree. So the big circle mass you see in the middle is the cell body, and that's where the nucleus is, and the mitochondria and all the cellular organs you heard about in school. But then you see all of these branches coming off the top and the sides. Those are called dendrites, and they're actually named after tree because dendra is Latin for tree. And those are the parts that receive inputs from other neurons. And then this tube coming off the bottom of the cell body, it actually goes on for a long, long ways. I couldn't capture it with this picture. But it's called an axon, and that sends the message to the other neurons. So the 3 main points to know are that the dendrites receive messages from other neurons, the cell body integrates the signal, and then it sends the output down the axon to the next neuron. And then the 2 main points to know in terms of autism are that babies actually develop more neurons and synapses, which are connections between neurons. They develop more of them than necessary. So they overgrow, as Dr. Basu was talking about earlier. And then they're actually pruned back based on which ones are the most active. So the most active neurons and synapses stay, and the least active ones actually are they die off. And this happens during normal development. So let's talk more about why children's brains are so sensitive. So here you see a cartoon of the whole brain, and the blood vessels are shown in red. And prenatal brains are actually more sensitive to the environment than adults because they don't have the protection of something called the blood-brain barrier. So normally the blood in your brain actually, it prevents toxins and bad chemicals from reaching your brain. We have this extra special barrier just for the brain. And it's not developed in prenatal brains. And it actually isn't even fully developed after babies are born. During the first year or so, they're still very sensitive to the environment because this blood-brain barrier isn't fully formed. And therefore, they can't actually detoxify any kind of harmful fatty substances that might be in breast milk or anything else that they might be ingesting. So that's an important point to keep in mind. So with that in mind, we'll just go over the parts of the social brain. So the brain is very specialized in that each region does a special function. And there are certain regions of the brain that are involved in social behavior. So this is a brain model, and we're looking at it from the top. So the eyes would be at the bottom of the slide, and the top of the slide would be the back of your head. So we're looking at it as if we're like a bird's eye view of the brain. And the part mostly involved in social behavior is called the limbic system. And it's called this because it's centered around the limbic lobe, which is in the middle of your brain. And this is the part that's called the older part of your brain because we share this with other animals. So you can see the cingulate gyrus, it forms an arc over the middle part of the brain in blue. And then the fornix, which is in light green, actually forms an arc that starts in the middle of the brain and curves around the side to the ear. And it curves underneath that piece of the brain that you're looking at on the right side. But if you take off that piece, as shown in the far right image, if you take off that piece that's blocking our view, the fornix curves around into the hippocampus and the amygdala. And the hippocampus is critical for learning and memory, and the amygdala is actually called like the fear center. So that helps you decide whether or not to fight or flight, so they say, in stressful situations. That's basically your fear center. So the social behavior, what's important to know about this circuitry is that it develops during critical periods of development. So there are certain times of development that are more important, or this circuitry is more sensitive to outside influences than other times. And so, for example, there are critical periods for facial processing and for language discrimination. And so I have written here that language discrimination of phonemes is less than 3 years old. So a phoneme is a basic unit of language, like a ba or ma, or like similar to a syllable, but it's more like a sound. And babies, the critical period for them to learn to distinguish between these phonemes is less than 3 years old. And so keeping critical periods in mind for later, we'll go through the developmental changes in neurons. So there's changes on the circuitry level, which we just talked about, but those circuits are made up of neurons that connect. And each of these neurons changes during critical periods based on activity. So if there's a lot of input and activity during a critical period, the circuit will develop, it'll be more enriched basically, and it'll have a more complex network. If there's no input to that circuitry during its critical window of development, then it's not going to develop as well. And also, there's a period of synaptic pruning, which I talked about earlier, where the synapses are pruned back. So the more active synapses stay and the less active ones die off. So the more enriched a baby is or a child is during their critical window, the more complex their synaptic circuitry will be. And something also very important is the balance of the excitatory and inhibitory synapses. So your brain actually is made up of positive and negative signals. So I mentioned earlier that neurons are based on electrical circuits. And some of these signals are positive and some are negative. And actually about 90% of your signals are positive. But the 10% that are negative actually act as a brake on the positive excitatory ones. So it's important to have this right balance. Otherwise, if your brain becomes too positive or too overactive, then it might lead to something like a seizure. But then if you have the inhibitory neurons and synapses put the brake on all of the positive signals, then you have the right balance of signals in your brain. And this is actually a major theory of autism, is that the balance of excitatory and inhibitory input is abnormal. Oh, so I see there's a question. What is the current research on the age limits of brain plasticity? So I think there's different critical periods for different circuits. So I don't think you could say like there's one age that everything needs to be developed by. And certainly even though like language has these critical windows, like the phonemes you develop before age 3, but you can learn a different language. It's easier when you're younger, like up to age 8. I mean, you can do it when you're older than that, but you have to be more motivated. But each circuit seems to have a different type of critical window. And did you?
Yeah, I just want to add a few points. So there are two different maybe thoughts or ideas or observations we are talking about. One is the critical period, and the other is brain plasticity. So in fact, current research suggests that the human brain has enormous capacity to form new synapses and connections, and in fact that persists well into adulthood. But the critical periods are probably, as Catherine mentioned, it's different for different areas. But it's probably a more positive note that the human brain learns new things even at a much later age, and that is one of the reasons that a child or an adolescent affected with autism needs some kind of interactive learning even much later.
Yes, and with that, I'll move to the next slide to keep it moving. And this is talking about how brain chemicals are affected in autism spectrum disorders. So this image here on the left is a cartoon of a synapse. So that's, as we said earlier, the connection between neurons. So this is a very close-up view of the end of an axon on the top in the yellow, which is the presynaptic terminal, and it's connecting to a dendrite on the bottom in the purplish pink, which is called the postsynaptic terminal. And they actually do not touch. They're separated by about 20 nanometers of space, and that's called the synaptic cleft. And once the axon or the presynaptic terminal is activated, it releases these chemicals called neurotransmitters, which cross the cleft and then bind to receptors on the postsynaptic side, which is the dendrite. So the neurotransmitters are the basis of this chemical signal, but hormones can actually modulate the activity of the transmitters. So hormones are present at the synapse as well. And what we know about brain chemicals in autism so far is that as far as hormones go, researchers have found low levels of oxytocin and vasopressin, which are both important hormones for social recognition, social contact, and social bonding. And as far as neurotransmitters go, there are low levels of the neurotransmitter serotonin, which you might recognize as also it's an antidepressant neurotransmitter. So there's low levels of that in depression, and then antidepressants increase the levels of serotonin. But in autism, there's also low levels of serotonin, and that's important to know because it regulates oxytocin and vasopressin. So if we go back to the main view that I showed you earlier of the brain with the social circuitry, some autism spectrum disorder differences that we know so far are that there's reduced connections between the frontal lobe, which is at the bottom of the slide here, so that's, as I said, above your eyes. There's reduced connections between it and the limbic system. And that's important to know because your frontal lobe is actually the part that performs your executive functions, and that means that that's basically your personality and your modulation of your own behavior. So it basically is what makes you behave appropriately in situations. And if you have reduced connections between that and your limbic system, you might not act appropriately, or you might not know how to act in different situations. There's also differences in the visual pathway that have been found in the social brain. So the part of the brain, of the cortex, which is the wrinkly part you see on top, the part that processes your vision is actually in the back of your head. So even though your eyes are in the front of your head, the information is processed in the back of your head. And what we know so far is that the eye tracking experiments show that babies normally pay most attention to the eyes, and the next thing they pay attention to is the mouth. But what we know is that people with ASD actually pay less attention to the eyes than so-called neurotypical people do. And one part of the brain that's important for this is called the fusiform gyrus, which you can't actually see in this picture because it's underneath the lobe that's facing us. It's basically sandwiched in between the top peach wrinkly part and then the bottom dark orange wrinkly part. But it's called the fusiform gyrus, and it's part of the visual processing pathway, and that's altered. So we only have a few minutes. I'll go briefly through these other parts. Another region is called the superior temporal sulcus, which is actually like the valley in between the two wrinkles that you see here. And they have mirror neurons that are called that because they fire when other people perform something. And basically, it's you watching someone else do something, and then they allow you to mirror that behavior. And then as far as repetitive behavior goes, that's probably the least well-known area of the 3 core symptoms of autism. But what we do know is that it increases with anxiety, stress, boredom, or excitement. So it seems to be normally an adaptive feature to help you handle stress, but it's just gone over, it's overactive in people with autism. And this is the last slide on the brain biology section before we go to the trends in the website, is that the communication section, it actually includes both verbal and nonverbal language. And there are specific regions of the brain that pertain to communication of both verbal and nonverbal forms. And the 2 that I wanted to point out today are the Broca's area, which is shown here with the orange circle, which actually is responsible for producing speech. And the purple area in the back is called Wernicke's area, and that's important for understanding speech. And there's a lot of brain imaging studies being done right now to piece out the circuitry of language, and a lot of it's being done for autism as well. And so on that note, I'm going to switch to Eric Larsen, who's a researcher here also, and he's briefly going to go over our trends section where you can find out what's being done right now as far as autism research goes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Larsen. I'm another one of the scientists here at MindSpec, and we'll just briefly go over some of the content in the trends section of the Autism Reading Room. And to access trends, there's a specific trends sub-navigation tab located on the homepage of the Autism Reading Room. And just to kind of, there's a lot of content within that section, but the one that we're going to highlight here, the graph that's visible now, is just a trend showing the various topics being dealt with in publications in autism research as of April of this year. So by and large, the majority of publications in autism research deal with genetics, trying to identify the potential genetic lesions responsible for autism, followed by both non-pharmaceutical and pharmaceutical therapies, brain imaging studies, biomarkers, and stem cells. We can go over more of the actual contents and what these mean if anyone has any questions. But additional topics within the trends section, we have devoted to the historical trends, autism over the decades, just the major benchmarks of autism research over the decades, a current trends Google tools. And when we do the tour of the website, if anyone has any particular interest, we can show these directly. A section called In the News, which just gives regular updates as far as news items dealing with autism. Statistics showing, for example, the graph that we have here, which are trends as far as publications in autism research. And then a very important section called Misconceptions, because there are a lot of misconceptions about autism. So we're trying to really address a lot of these misconceptions and help people understand, here's what's actually known, here's what the scientific evidence says as far as different aspects of this disease. So I guess we can move on next to a tour of the reading room. And we have, which I'll do. Should I move over there? Yeah. Just hang on a second, please. Oh, here it is. All right, so now we are, hopefully everyone can see this. This is a live feed of the Autism Reading Room, which is available at readingroom.mindspec.org. And just to kind of go over some of the different features, we have the home page, the About section, which just gives a lot of the frequently asked questions and information about us here at MindSpec. The Trends section, which I just spoke about, and the different topics there in research. So this would be autism over the decades. So this is just showing, for example, in the 1950s, there were 45 articles published during that year. And here we've kind of summarized just the highlights or hallmarks of research within that decade, just to kind of show how autism research has progressed over the years. In the news section, we have news in context, news categories, and news archives. So if we go to news in context, this is a recent news report that Catherine actually posted on the website dealing with 3 new publications that linked hundreds of additional genes to those that are already known to potentially play a role in autism. And this is updated based on a variety of reports. And then we also have links to the original news reports for those. And I'll go to the misconceptions page just because I think that's an important one. So for example, one of the misconceptions we're trying to address is deals with genetic risk factors. So there's a misconception that autism is caused by a mutation in only one gene, whereas in truth autism is thought to be caused by a combination of genetic and environmental factors. And we have other risk factors misconceptions, such as whether vaccines can cause autism, diagnosis misconceptions, and a variety of other topics. Moving on to the clinic section, so Dr. Basu spent some time going over the autism profile section, and the therapy section is still under construction. We have a diagnosis section dealing with the diagnosis criteria that is used to diagnose autism, as well as different tools for screening of infants and children and additional diagnostic testing tools. And within the clinic section, we also have descriptions on risk factors, both genetic factors and environmental factors. The brain biology section, Catherine spent some time describing some of the contents there, but some of the topics we address are development, the social brain, repetitive behavior, and communication. We have a section devoted to advances in autism research and clinical understanding, such as brain imaging, biomarkers, and stem cell research, and how stem cells could be used potentially in autism research. And lastly, we'll go to the tools section, which are a variety of tools that we have in place to have for visitors to the website. We have a dictionary of terms, a public policy forum that's underway, additional resources that we're in the process of adding. And at this point, I'll demonstrate, we have an autism quiz. So there's an app for this that's freely available at the iTunes store. So you can go to iTunes and download the app for your iPhone or iPad. So just to kind of give you an overview of the contents of the autism quiz, and I encourage everyone here to visit the website and try out all of the features in the reading room, but especially the autism quiz, just to get an idea of what that is entails. So, for example, with the beginner quiz, questions would be, what is a type of autism spectrum disorder? So if we select the correct answer, it will tell you you have a correct answer, and it will show how many other people have answered this question. And in those situations where let's select an incorrect answer, it will say that it's incorrect, give a brief description, and then links to the different sections of the Autism Reading Room that go into more detail about that topic. So, for example, this would ask you if you want to learn more about statistics of autism prevalence, you could visit the statistics section or the trends corner of the Autism Reading Room. So that kind of gives an overview of the features of the reading room, and we encourage everybody to please take a look at it. If you have any questions about it, can we go back to the... Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Can we just click on this?
Go back to the
Oh, here we go. Okay. So, as I said, and please, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us at info@mindspec.org. We appreciate any feedback that we can get from everybody to see if there's anything that you like or any topics that you would like us to address or in more detail. So I guess with that.
We had one question that came in, and that was whether or not you needed to show deficiencies in all three areas, social interaction, language, and repetitive fixed behaviors, to be diagnosed as autistic.
Okay, so the question was, here we go, from Laura. Do you need to show deficiencies in all three areas, social interaction, language, and repetitive or fixed behaviors, to be diagnosed as autistic? You want to?
Hello, I'll take this question. This is Sharmila, Banerjee-Basu. At present, for the DSM diagnostic scale, you need to show deficiencies in all three areas for autism spectrum disorder. But these three different areas are further categorized into more observable definitions, like whether there is a delay in language development and joint attention and repetitive behavior. So that's what the current diagnostic criteria requires to show, be positive in all three areas. However, in the upcoming diagnostic manual, DSM-5, this criteria will change into two different areas of impairments.
Okay. Are there any other questions at this time from our participants? If you do have a question, go ahead and utilize your chat bar. I'd like to thank everybody for attending this webinar, and you do still have time to type in your questions. I hope that you will be able to share this information with your child's teachers, with family members, and help them in further understanding autism, as well as share with them the resource. The Autism Reading Room is definitely a wonderful attempt to catalog and give all of us kind of a Cliff Notes version of emerging research and best practices, especially with the new therapy section. So I think it is a wonderful tool that all of us can use in promoting better tomorrows for our children with special needs. So having said that, unless there are any other questions, which I can definitely wait if people do have some, we will thank all the folks from MindSpec for generously sharing their time and getting the word out about this great resource.
Thank you. And we are pleased with this opportunity to present our work and our thoughts on autism.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Participants, you will be receiving a couple follow-up emails regarding the webinar. One of them is very important to us at PEATC, and that is you will be receiving a survey so you can rate your experience. So we definitely hope that you will do that. And stay tuned for more great webinars from PEATC. Thanks, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.